Yo, what is up, guys? It's Cohen back here again today with another video. Today I'm not going to do a full recap of the NBA games. There weren't a ton of interesting storylines I really wanted to talk about, but I'm going to quickly go through the Rockets-Thunder game just because that's my favorite team. Shout out the Thunder. They got a pretty big win tonight. Go ahead, drop a like, drop a subscribe, whatever you're feeling. Obviously, from the title of the video, you can tell that the main team I want to talk about is the Heat. So I'm going to go quickly over the Thunder game a little bit, and then I'm going to talk about the Heat a lot, who had a bad loss tonight to the Wizards, 103-100, without Russell Westbrook. Yeah, before I go and talk about this, let me know if you think the Heat can turn this around or if you think that this Heat team is screwed, and I'll go ahead and get into it. First of all, like I said, shout out the Thunder. 17-point win tonight. They were up by 20 or 30 a lot of the game. They kind of eased up a little bit at the end there, putting in some of their bench warmers. The Thunder tonight were without SGA. We didn't have Dort for the second half. He left the game in the first half with some knee soreness, praying that Dort's okay. I think he is. They just wanted to be precautious. You've got Kenrich Williams, who had 19 points. He was fantastic. Al Horford balled out. I love that the Thunder are pushing him as an all-star. I don't think he's going to get that nod, nor do I think he really fully deserves that nod, but I love that they're pushing him for it. Yeah, just all-around great win. Mark Daignault's been a great coach for us. I don't know if a lot of people know his name, so remember the name Mark Daignault because I think he is going to be a really good coach for a long time. He always has this team playing hard. He makes great adjustments. Tonight was like a masterclass in coaching from him. We got blown up by 30 last game, and then we came out and then did the other side of that too. The Rockets tonight blew them out, so shout out to him. Now we're going to go ahead and talk about the Miami Heat. After tonight's loss to Washington, they're 7-14, 13th in the East. Like I said, the loss to Washington was without Russell Westbrook. They lost 103-100. It was not pretty. You can't only score 100 points on the Washington Wizards. This Wizards team gives up like 120 a game. They're one of the worst defenses we've seen in the league. If the Nets weren't there, they probably would be the worst defense in the league. But you have to do better than this. You just have to. And for a team coming out of the finals last season, obviously they lost in 6 games to the Lakers. They had that amazing run in the bubble. They just haven't looked the same. And I think that the high expectations that people had for them is why so many people are now souring on the Heat very quickly. Twitter's turning on them really fast. I see a lot of people going after Spoelstra. I see a lot of people going after Pat Riley. And we'll get into some of the changes that happened with the team, some of the decisions that have been made that maybe you could criticize Pat Riley for. You could try and make decisions. But I'll go ahead and talk about the team first. 26th in the league in scoring. They're giving up the 6th most points in the NBA up to this point. There is still a lot of time left in the season. They're only a couple games out of the playoffs. I think they're only 2.5, 3-ish games out of the playoffs. The Hornets ended up losing tonight to the Sixers, who just murdered the Hornets. Prayers out to Cody Zeller for that. But the Hornets losing keeps them only a few games out of reach of the playoffs. There's still plenty of time. I still would be honestly kind of surprised if this team didn't make the playoffs. And Jimmy has missed a lot of time with COVID, but he is back now. In those 3 games he's been back, they've went 1-2. They won their first game against Sacramento by, I believe, 1 point. Then they lost to Charlotte in overtime. Then tonight, of course, they lost to Washington, like I keep saying, without Russell Westbrook. It's just they haven't looked like the same team at all. They haven't looked like the lock you up and hit a 3 in your mouth every single possession Miami Heat team that they looked like last season, especially in the bubble where they were just coming out, they were locking you up, they drill threes, they would make it impossible to defend them, they played hard to sell every night. It just doesn't look like they really have that right now. Like that, I guess I hate that the term Heat culture because I feel like it's kind of overused, but I guess Heat culture really is what you want to call it. The fact that they would go out there, play hard as hell every single night, and just lock you up. They haven't looked like that this season. And I think part of that is missing some of the pieces they had last season. You now have Myers Leonard, who's out for the season. He wasn't a huge part to that team last season, especially in the playoffs. He largely didn't play in the playoffs, but he was still a decent part of that team. He's now out for the season. You could question Pat Riley giving him $10 million. He does have a team option this next season, which I'm sure they'll decline, but I guess you could question them using that money on Myers Leonard. You have Jay Crowder, who they're missing. He's not playing fantastically this season with the Suns, but last season for the Heat, he was amazing. I think he just fit this Heat team. He fit that Heat culture we were just talking about, and he was a big part of why they were he's a good defender, and he knocks down the 3 whenever you need to, which is like the identity of this team kind of. When you've got guys like Duncan Robinson, you've got a guy like Jimmy Butler who doesn't shoot a ton of threes, but he can nail some, especially in the playoffs. He turned into like a great 3-point shooter in the bubble playoffs last season. Jay Crowder just fit this team really well, and I hated to see him walk. I mean, he did obviously probably go chase a bag in Phoenix. I don't think the Heat were going to give him that much money, but I don't know. I just would have loved some way that if the Heat could have kept Jay Crowder. I feel like he was a perfect player for this team. Derrick Jones Jr., he is gone. He great athletic playmaker, solid defender, and without him, you kind of lose a little bit of that depth, which I think is a big part of why this team's struggling. Avery Bradley, who they tried to replace these guys with, or he was one of their replacements, just hasn't been very good this season. Like, he's been okay, but obviously he's not this Avery Bradley he used to be when he was with like the Celtics. Doesn't look as good as he was last season for the Lakers prior to the bubble where he opted out. He did spend a lot of time off, so that could be a part of it. It could be some rust. I mean, you've got guys getting older. Like Jimmy Butler's only 31, but regression is going to come in a couple years. I don't think it's going to come until maybe he's 33, 34-ish, but he's also Jimmy Butler, so he could still be very good for a while because he has a really tough game where he just plays hard that I feel like will kind of age well. Goran Dragic now is 34, though. He's going to continue to age. Andre Iguodala is 37. He's going to retire soon, and it's kind of looking like. Well, okay. Also, one more thing, like I mentioned before, you have to keep in mind that they have only had a couple months off. That's one more thing you need to keep in mind when trying to gauge the performance. Although I don't know how much of an excuse that is because the Lakers in the other conference have looked incredible and they also had the same amount of time off. So you can't really use that as an excuse too much. But it's looking like this Heat team may have peaked last season. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, it's possible they also might not have peaked. They have Hero, they have Bam, two really, really good young players, especially Bam Adebayo. I think he is a going to be like a perennial All NBA type player in a couple seasons. He's incredible. He's so good, and I think he should be an All Star this season. But just like I don't know, it's just not the same team, you know. And when I say they've peaked, if you're a Heat fan listening to this, don't get mad at me because there's a lot worse peaks you can have than pushing the LA Lakers with LeBron James to a 6-game finals. Like, there's a lot worse places you could peak. Like, it's not a bad thing to have peaked in the finals. And like I just said, it's possible they also have not peaked. The problem is, like I said, the guys are getting older. You do have, like I said, Hero and Bam as young guys, but when you have Butler who's going to have maybe 2 or 3 years left of being like a really, really good player, and then he's going to start to decline because he's not LeBron James, and LeBron's like the only player who can play at that high of a level into that very, very old age. Dragic is coming off a major foot injury, and he is 34. He's going to get older. I wouldn't be surprised if he retired in a few seasons. Iguodala could retire, like, I feel like any season now. And he isn't really even a huge part of this team anymore. I have kind of harped on him a lot just because he was an important addition last season, even though he isn't like a huge part of this team. I mean, you do have another guy like Precious Achiuwa, you have KZ Okpala, who are interesting players, but you need to see a little bit more what you have for them. I know Heat fans are super high on KZ Okpala. I've loved what Precious Achiuwa has shown so far, but as far as this season, he's just been like a good rookie. He hasn't been a championship caliber player that they need him to play like if this Heat team wants to find a way to repeat their Eastern Conference championship. Additionally, their first round pick this season, part of why I'm not like super pressed about the Heat struggling is because their first round pick belongs to the Thunder this season. We get their pick if it's worse than ours, or if it's worse than ours and the Rockets, then we get their pick, which is looking like it's definitely going to be. At least if this continues, it will be worse than our pick, and so we will get it. It's possible they could make the playoffs and that we'll get that pick, and it's like not a very good pick. So it wouldn't have even mattered if they got it or not. But if this team continues to struggle and they don't get to add a young piece like that, that's a huge blow to a team that has a pretty aging core. You want to keep adding those young pieces so that even when a Dragic retires, Iguodala retires, and Butler starts getting older, you could have young guys who continue to step up. And if this Heat team had their pick, even if they were doing terrible this season, I wouldn't be too pressed about it because this draft has some huge players in it. If you could add a Cade Cunningham or an Evan Mobley or something like that to this Heat core with like a Bam and a Bio, I don't know how Mobley and Bam necessarily would work. Maybe more so like a Cade Cunningham to this core. That'd be crazy. But they don't have their pick. So it's not going to happen. And I think that really what it culminates in is something that a lot of people are going to talk about. And a lot of people right now on Twitter, my phone was blowing up earlier, or my timeline was blowing up earlier with a lot of talk about this, is should the Heat have dealt Tyler Hero and other guys for James Harden to try and maximize this window? It's kind of an interesting dilemma. I don't really have a full stance on it. I think that the idea of saying, no, we don't want to trade for James Harden because we want to keep Tyler Hero is kind of crazy because James Harden is a top 6, 7, 5-ish player, depending on where you want to place him. I don't really know. He's incredible is all you need to know. And he's a great player, and with a team that just went to the finals, if you add James Harden, I think this Heat team might have been an East favorite. Or maybe not necessarily an East favorite, but definitely in that top 3 echelon. Right now, this Heat team, I don't see them beating that Brooklyn Nets team, which is another problem. By not adding James Harden, you let Harden go to the Nets. And this Nets team now, I don't see this Heat team beating that Nets team, because the problem with the Nets is that is like big men. If you have someone who can dominate the paint, like Bam Adebayo is pretty good, but he's not that like prolific scorer that like a Joel Embiid or a Giannis Antetokounmpo is. Like those are guys who can take down that Nets team, I think. The problem is with your team is that your guys are getting older, and while Bam Adebayo could develop into that scoring threat, I just don't know if it's going to be enough in time. It's an interesting debate. Let me know what you think in the comments about this whole Harden trade thing, because I think it's interesting to think about if this Heat team made a mistake by not trading for James Harden. I know, like I was just harping on their future. You would be giving up a lot of assets. You would be giving up a lot of depth. But how much does that matter to add a player like James Harden? I don't know. It's interesting to think about. I think that's all I want to talk about. I kind of rambled about this for longer than I meant to, but I think the Heat are a really interesting team this season. I predicted them to be around the 4 or 5 seed, and a lot of people call me disrespectful. I think they forgot that the Heat played in the finals like 2 months before the season started, so you have to remember that. Yeah. Anyways, let me know what you think about the Heat. Let me know what you think about the James Harden situation, and I'll talk to you guys later.